Welcome, everyone, to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I am your host, as always, Mr. Brian Slagel from Metal Blade Records. If you need to know more about Metal Blade, just go to metalblade.com and you'll get your education there. So you guys have to check out our friends at Old Glory. Old Glory offers over 300,000 items for music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture fans, featuring officially licensed merch from iconic brands and top sports teams. Discover the perfect fan gear, and you can save with our exclusive discount. When you go to oldglory.com and buy your stuff, enter the code METAL1982. Again, that's METAL1982. You're going to get 15% off of your order. So go to oldglory.com, check out their stuff, and buy some things. Thank you. This episode, I'm really excited about. One of my favorite albums, one of my favorite songs, King Diamond's 7th Day of July, 1777. We're going to talk to Andy La Rocque about it. We're going to talk to producer Marc Lewis about the production. But first, our friend from Canada, Mr. Martin Popoff, to give you some info.
Thanks very much, Brian. Very cool choice. The 7th day of July, 1777. So this is from Abigail. This is King Diamond's second solo album. Obviously, the King Diamond situation overtook the Merciful Fate situation. King Diamond was a greatly beloved band. Abigail is considered the band's crowning masterpiece, I suppose. Sold 175,000 copies in the U.S., initially on Roadrunner, right? And later on, we get an Abigail 2, of course, which is highly regarded as well. But Abigail is a great sort of proto-power metal album, professional power metal album, progressive metal album, depending on the way you look at it. I mean, this song itself is very progressive. It's a 9/4 time or 9/8 time, depending on how you count your nines. 9 actually features in the story with the whole 18 will become 9 situation in this album. It's recorded at Soundtrack Studios, Denmark. This, again, is kind of like a proggy song, but it also has this hiccup beat or this added beat, and it grooves so well. And why does it groove so well? Because this is a showcase album for drummer Mickey D. He's obviously a great technician, but he's got great groove as well, but he's also super tight. We're going to know this as well when he goes on and becomes even more famous as the drummer for Motorhead. But yeah, this is a concept album about this couple that moves into this house. This is taking place in 1845, and there's this Jonathan LaFay, and there's the family ghost Count de LaFay, and Jonathan meets with the Count, and the Count informs that there's this corpse, this stillborn child corpse that is Abigail, and that Abigail's spirit resides in Miriam, and Jonathan's supposed to kill Miriam, sort of thing. So yeah, this great concept album that turns out to be a huge hit album for King. Obviously hit in our very purist metal world, and there's nothing more purist than King Diamond, because also you have to get into his world of vocals to get into the King Diamond catalog. And on this one, he is basically in the falsetto all the way throughout. So yeah, this is a textbook example of King Diamond vocals. But what a band that he's assembled to do this record. You've got King himself, who is in Merciful Fate, but you've got Andy La Rocque, who is the dedicated sort of heart and soul of the King Diamond band. But you've also got Michael Denner on guitars, who was also in Merciful, and Timmy Hansen, bassist, also in Merciful, and as we say, Mickey D as well. Andy La Rocque figures this is his favorite of all the King Diamond albums because of such a great working atmosphere in the band. So yeah, there's always been this long-standing debate, we want King to make more Merciful Fate stuff. I've actually done a Merciful Fate book, of course, and Merciful Fate, put King Diamond on the map with the incredible masterpieces that were Melissa and Don't Break the Oath. But then there's just been this debate all along where we've had Merciful Fate albums and we've had King Diamond albums. But, you talk to King, and I have a few times, and he always definitely says that, look, I do better business as King Diamond. I love both bands equally. King Diamond is more my thing. I do great business with that band, and and it did take off bigger than Merciful Fate, which is kind of odd because Merciful Fate, of course, is the core starting band. But yeah, there's been the two catalogs over the years, and King Diamond has been very prolific. And like I say, probably his greatest creative masterpiece in terms of storyline. Like I say, there's more concept. Well, this is a concept album, but there's much more concept when it comes to King Diamond. This is his greatest masterpiece, and yeah, he's had a great career as King Diamond. So there you go, a great, super highly professional, beautifully recorded, progressive metal / power metal epic, The Seventh Day of July, 1777.
Thanks, Martin. Really great amount of information there. And of course, we will talk to Mr. Andy La Rocque shortly. And once again, we bring in my friend, Mr. Producer, Marc Lewis, who's worked with Whitechapel, Black Dahlia Murder, Trivium, a billion different bands. Look up his Wikipedia and you'll see all the long list of stuff. And it all sounds really good too. Well, how are you today, sir?
Thanks very much. I appreciate that, man. I'm good. Glad to see you. Happy to be back.
This time we're talking about King Diamond's great album, Abigail, and the incredible song, The Seventh Day of July, 1777. It's hard to pick out a track to talk about on this record. It's King's seminal solo record, obviously, hugely influential. So many great songs. I mean, Abigail, Black Horseman. But I thought this song is a really interesting one because he still plays it live. And there's a lot of different elements to this song that I felt were really kind of progressive in an unusual way, I guess.
I mean, it's a great sounding record, number one. I don't remember who produced it.
I'm going to butcher his name, but I think Robert Falco, right?
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. But I mean, that song sounds great, but I feel like bands like the Swedish death metal guys, especially In Flames, who had a lot of these acoustic intros early on in their career, and it's still kind of their specialty. It's like something that Bjorn really does really well, and In Flames is these harmonized acoustic intros. And the way that Andy La Rocque picked these acoustic intros and stuff really, I think, carried over and caught the ear of the Swedes. There's just a lot of big influence on this record. I mean, it's extreme metal, but there's a really defined hook, and it sounds big, and it's super proficient playing. I mean, this song's almost 40 years old. It's one of the first really well-produced progressive and extreme metal forays into that type of metal. I mean, it's a concept album too, isn't it? The whole thing?
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
I don't know the lyrics front to back on this one, but I know the songs and I know the hooks. Was there a record that did that? I mean, we're not talking about Rush or somebody like that. Like somebody something with metal this extreme. Did that exist? I mean, I would be curious.
I mean, there were definitely concept albums before that, but I think this was kind of in that more extreme world. Absolutely, one of the first ones, and one of the most legendary ones. And you can read even Wikipedia has a great synopsis of the characters and the story. And King's an amazing guy because his imagination is out of this world. And I always love, and most of the King Diamond records are all concept records. I think all but one or two of them are, and this one being one of the first ones. But it's always really interesting to talk to him because he'll tell the story, and he's so detailed into how he tells the story. I remember, I forget which album it was that we did, but we were doing one of the records and he was telling me the story of the record. It was like a 45-minute long, very detailed story of what was going on. I said, would you do this like as a video so we could put it out for fans to see? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So he got, all dressed up and everything. And by candlelight, we filmed the whole thing and put it out there, which is really cool because hearing it come from him, it's so unique. And this whole album, it's a very gruesome tale, I guess you can say. It's pretty fascinating, and to put all of that lyrically into a whole record and then also with all this amazing music is pretty phenomenal. But to go back to the production thing really quickly, I think that knowing King and Andy really well, and we're going to talk to Andy La Rocque after this about the song and the record, so we'll get some more insight from him. I mean, Andy's a producer. He didn't produce this record. This is early on in his tenure with King Diamond, so he wasn't producing them yet. And King basically produces his records. So I think those two guys being in the studio with their knowledge is probably a big part of why the record sounds like it does.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Andy obviously is a legendary producer and guitar player, been on so many of my favorite records. It's a brilliant sounding record, and it was right at that cusp of when things started to really sound great or sound terrible. Because it was a lot of things were starting to get really mired in reverb the couple of years before that. And this one's a really good balance of not being too drowned out. It's got a pro sheen to it. It's got a good high end, and it's just good, and it's a bunch of killers on it too. I mean, obviously Andy's amazing and the band's great, and you can't not mention Mickey D, who's in my opinion the most underrated drummer in metal. Not that he's not well known, but he's just got he's got such a pocket, and when you hear this record, you're just like, oh man, there's no editing back then, at least not like we can do now with the quantizing. And it's just got his thing, man. That guy's pocket is just so overlooked, and he's such a brilliant drummer. And I just love how he makes records feel, and all the stuff he did with Motorhead. And it's great. It was just a band of badass players.
Yeah, and they were kind of in their prime at this point too. So, all those guys were hitting on all cylinders and really in their prime. And it absolutely shows on just why this record is such a classic and so revered even today. An interesting thing though about the sound. So there's been a few versions of this record that have come out. Like we at Metal Blade now have the entire King Diamond catalog, so we own all of it. But when it was on Roadrunner and started on Roadrunner, obviously they had a couple of different versions of it that came out that I know King wasn't overly enthralled by the remastering of them. I think partially because I don't think that he was really involved in them. So we kind of went back and forth when we got the catalog back about which version of this record in particular did we want to put up on all the streaming services, and as well as repress on vinyl and CD. And we kind of worked around getting the version that King wanted, obviously, most importantly, but we got it. And I remember listening to it a couple of weeks ago because I hadn't heard it for a while. I listened to it I'm not a headphone guy really, but I love these Motorhead headphones that they made. To me, they're the best sounding headphones ever for metal. And I know like Lemmy had a big hand in actually creating the sound of it. And just for whatever reason, those headphones, and they've been out of print for years. I've gone and bought like 10 copies on eBay just to have a bunch of them around because they get old and start to fall apart. But anyway, I was listening to it on Apple Music, I think, and it dawned on me like, wow, this record still sounds so rich and full. So we luckily got the right version of it, and we're able to. It's hard sometimes to get some of these older records to sound really good on the streaming services because the technology is different, and a lot of this stuff was recorded in analog, and now you're dealing with it in a digital form. But man, it sounded. I'd forgotten how good that record really sounded.
Oh yeah, and it sounds killer. You have me wondering so much now. I mean, what was Monty the A&R? Was it Case on that record when they were doing it on Roadrunner?
Well, Case had signed Merciful Fate, obviously, and he was dealing directly with King when King went solo. So I don't know that Monty had a whole lot to do with the early King Diamond stuff. I mean, obviously, everybody had to work with King, but my recollection is. And I'll ask Andy actually about that because he would probably know too. But my recollection was always Case and King were the two kind of main ones dealing with it.
Yeah, I'd be so interested to hear about the different revisions and who did the mastering. And I'm curious, what we're hearing on the streaming services, like as far as the credits are concerned, who was doing the mixing and mastering on those?
Yeah, well, this is basically so there were a couple of versions that Roadrunner did that weren't King Diamond approved, and they didn't quite sound as good when they were like reissuing them or whatever. So like I said, when we took everything over again, we picked the version that King liked the best. Basically, it's pretty much the original version, just updated a little bit so it sounds fresher, I believe. But yeah, it came out really good. I'm trying to remember who actually put all of this together. I wasn't involved in that. Like, as long as King's happy, I'm happy. So I want to make sure he's all good with it.
He's always so good at hooks, and it's hard to make hooks out of words that people don't normally sing, like July and 1777. And there's something to be said about that. Even it's not like a hook that you can predict, but he made a great song out of this complicated storyline, and it was hugely influential, obviously, and you can't not recognize, what he did there as far as the storytelling is concerned.
It's interesting because, he's telling a story here. Just like anything we talk about, any band or any great song, it's unique, right? That's why I picked this song. I think this is the most unique song on the record. It's not the most popular, obviously. Like I said, Abigail and Black Horseman are probably the most popular, and I'll probably at some point get to one of those somewhere down the road in this podcast. But I wanted to start off with this one because it's just such a unique and different song. And when you talk to musicians, people who are really influenced by this album, this song always comes up. Like, he's still playing it in his shows even today, which I think is pretty interesting. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
And his vocals are really, like, his aggressive vocals were particularly aggressive on that record. I feel like more aggressive, I think, than some of the other records, whether it was his choice or just where he was at the time. But I feel like his almost black metal-y voice that has to be something that the Northern Europeans really latched onto. Because, we're talking, 1987. It's not like, I guess Bathory was in existence and Venom was too, but their vocals weren't that powerful in terms of the stuff, that was going on. And King really pushed it on that record, I think.
Yeah, and I think he was kind of trying to find his way too as a solo artist, because obviously he'd come from Merciful Fate and, again, one of the most influential bands of all time in metal. So now he's got King Diamond, and I think he wanted to try to make it a little bit different and make it more, not just be Merciful Fate. You had a couple of the guys from Merciful Fate playing on the record. So it was hard. It was interesting how they distinguished themselves, because King Diamond and Merciful Fate, if you ask me, two very, very different things. Like,
oh, for sure,
you can't compare them or the music really either way, even though I think at this point 3/5 of Merciful Fate were playing on the record. But that also lends to Andy's influence by it, and also King trying to do something a little bit different, especially vocally.
Yeah, it was definitely different, and I've never heard anybody outright say it in an interview, but I've not sought it out either. But like I said, the Northern European guys had to have latched on to that style, especially kind of that first wave of really, not first wave, but when black metal started to get more polished, it had to have, there's no coincidence that those guys were King Diamond, Merciful Fate fans, and it's pretty evident, and it's cool. It's cool. It's cool to trace that lineage back.
Oh, 100%. You're exactly right. You can't talk to any of those early or even later and bands like that weren't massively influenced by King Diamond, not just the makeup and the stage show, but definitely the music and certainly the vocals. Because he was doing, in addition to the high end stuff, he was doing like some interesting low end things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just a more distorted voice overall, and he wasn't doing just the falsetto-y guy, and just the kind of talky, creepy guy. There was a real. I would if I was producing something and telling a singer to do something, I would say, a black metal-y voice with that kind of distorted mid-range kind of gurgle to it,
And by the way, just to show you the wide range of influence King Diamond has. So King Diamond did that metal show with, Eddie Trunk and Jim Florentine and Don Jamieson back when it was on TV in VH1 Classic.
Mm-hmm.
So Eddie was telling me the story, because I went with King to the taping and everything, and he was telling me a story that Mark Tremonti from Creed, and of course later Alter Bridge and everything else, specifically wanted to be on that show because he wanted to meet King. He's a massive King Diamond fan, had never met King before.
Right.
So I was like, oh, cool. So I got to the taping pretty early, way before King did, and Mark was there. I hadn't met him before, but met him, and super great guy. And super cool. But man, he was like die hard King Diamond. He was nervous. Like he was like, I'm kind of nervous to meet him. Like he's super cool. Don't worry about it. We'll make it really good.
100%. Mark's a good friend of mine, has been for close to 20 years. And I just saw him over the holidays when I was down in Orlando doing some Trivium stuff. We'd get together and jam and just hang out. And funny story about Marc. He's like that with King Diamond, but also Celtic Frost. He's a gigantic Celtic Frost fan. I remember it was not long after we had first met. It was 2006 or 7 or something like that. So we known each other for a couple of years. He called me up one night. And he's like, "Hey man, let's go see Celtic Frost." He's like, "Yeah, man, I was planning on going to the show." He's like, "Well, yeah, meet me here. Let's go." And we end up going to see Celtic Frost at the back booth in Orlando, which is like this freaking venue the size of my studio that I'm in right now. It's so tiny and it's just horribly laid out. Terrible PA, but of course they go on and crush it. And Mark Tremonti, this guy's sold 30 million records in the United States, probably 100 million records in the friggin' world, is like on the stage headbanging like it was, 1982 at a Venom show, like just losing his mind. And I've never seen him go so crazy. He just was determined, not only to go to that show, but to talk to Tom and to Martin. We ended up closing down the bar in Orlando. Actually, I think we were there at another bar until almost 4:00 in the morning with Martin and Tom, just hanging out. And I got to thank Marc for that, especially getting to talk to Martin, rest in peace. But I'll never forget that night and how his passion for that European stuff is really true, man. I mean, that guy is a real metalhead, and it is definitely a testament to how far that stuff reaches,
Yeah, we did the early Celtic Frost or Celtic Frost, either way.
Mm-hmm.
I asked Martin about that and Tom, and they're like, "Hey, either way." I mean, it's technically in Europe it's Celtic, but a lot of times it's Celtic because we have the Boston Celtics in the U.S. But anyway, we did the early stuff, and somebody posted an old video of them. I don't know where from, but Tom has an old school Metal Blade shirt on, so I reposted it on my Instagram. So if you guys want to go check that out,
love that.
Anyway, another great song, King Diamond, 7th day of July, 1777. Say that 3 times fast, I dare you.
Never gonna happen.
Well, thanks again, man. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
All right, thanks a bunch, man.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, and now we welcome in the man who played guitar on this record, also co-wrote this song. He is the great guitar player from King Diamond and incredible producer who's got a long, long list of amazing credits. Mr. Andy La Rocque, how are you, sir?
Fine, thank you. How are you guys doing?
Good, man, really good. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate this. I always like to ask, so this is clearly a monumental historical album. When you guys were in the studio recording it, did you feel anything special about like, we think this is going to be really great, or it's just like, well, we're just making a record?
Yeah, when it comes to the Abigail album, I mean, we just had a really good feel about everything. We've been doing a couple of tours before we entered the studio, and we've been hanging out, pretty much, together with the band. And we just felt that, the songs were really good, and we were practicing and rehearsing really hard before the album, even though, we had not so much time, but it was very, very intense at the time. And we just got back from the first US tour back in the summer of '86. Just got back with, into the rehearsal room and just started on the songs, and we just felt that this is going to be great, So we had a really good feel about it, as far as I can remember. And after a while, of course, I only been in the band for like a year and a half when we entered the studio. We got to know each other, of course, on those small tours we did, and hanging out with each other and writing songs together and all that, So when we entered the studio, we just had a great feel.
Yeah, and we just talked about the production in the album with Mark Lewis, the producer, and we're talking about how the record just sounds really good. Especially, I know there's been a bunch of different versions of it over the years, and when we got a hold of the catalog, we wanted to get the best version of this and the one that you guys are happy with. And thankfully, it sounds really good. But Mark was mentioning that, and this is pretty much the case a lot of times when you have really elite musicians, and everybody that played on that record are elite musicians, obviously, you just get a really good cohesive sound.
Exactly. I mean, entering the studio back then, that was like total analog everything, a good console and some good tape machine, some good effects and compressors, and everything was like old school kind of style. Well, modern at that time, but if you look back at it now, it was like totally old school, So what we did at that time, we rehearsed a lot back then, like 5-6 days a week, to get everything totally 100%. That's what you did back then. Nowadays you can cheat, so it's totally different. But it was usually me and Mickey starting out, he with the drums, of course, and I just played like a cue guitar to his drumming. And once he was done with the drums, I started to put on the full rhythm guitars, and then we started to build everything up from that.
So what was the production level? Like, I'm curious about that because, King is obviously heavily involved in the production of his records. You're an amazing producer. So were you guys letting the engineer and producer kind of do their thing, or did you have a lot of say into how it would be done?
Yeah, I mean, when it came to details with the sound, we kind of trusted Roberto, which was the producer at the time, because I guess we didn't really have that experience. Of course, we knew a little bit about it, kind of, I want this guitar sound and, this and that. And Mickey knew what kind of drum sound he wanted, kind of thing, But then, of course, with the technology, we really trusted the producer, Roberto, at the time, I'm sure King had some things with his vocal sound and effects and reverbs and delay and all that, But when it came to the technical stuff, it was totally up to Roberto, and he came up with some great stuff, I think,
Yeah, it's a really great sounding record, especially for the time, because like you said, it was before all the new technology, so it's all old school analog done. And some records in the 80s, as much as I love them, some of the production values weren't great, or there's too much reverb or too much whatever. But this record just hit like everything. I mean, when you look back on it again as we are today, it's one of the masterpieces of metal and so important to the genre in general. And
Yeah.
the production levels are there because it sounds just as good today, I think, as it did when it came out. I listened to it a couple weeks ago on Apple Music with my Motorhead headphones, which I love, by the way, and it just sounds so good. It doesn't sound dated whatsoever.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, it sounds really good. It's got a warm, really cool feel to it, and it's not like totally exaggerated or extreme in sounding in a way. It's just a cool, analog, great, warm sound. I know there were a few remasters on it, that sounded very harsh, But if you can find the original or the original vinyl, whatever, it's a great sounding album, that's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And we used the original model basically for all the streaming and all the stuff that we've done since we've taken it over, which was, I know, important for you guys and important for me too, and make sure it all sounds good.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned Mickey D, again, incredible drummer. And we were talking about it with Mark too, and the production thing. Like, that's back in the days where pretty much you had to do the whole take on the drums. You couldn't really cut and paste too much of that.
There were some parts we could actually, do punch-ins on, but we usually did that on breaks and stuff, But I mean, usually Mickey played through the whole thing, amazing. At that time, we didn't even use click tracks or anything. We just, played by heart, played by feel. So I was just playing along, like a cue guitar to his drumming, and whatever came out, we kept that. But I mean, there were a few spots I remember that we did try to, punch in. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
This song specifically, which you obviously co-wrote, is an interesting one. And the reason why I picked this one over Black Horseman or Abigail, which I might get to at some point in these 100 songs. This one, though, I felt was really interesting because you had a lot of elements that at the time were kind of newer to metal and have become commonplace. Like, for example, the kind of acoustic guitar intro that not a lot of people were doing there is very classically influenced. Where did you come up with that, and how did you decide that the song would begin with that?
Back, in the early 80s, I was really influenced by guitar players who was playing that kind of classical kind of thing, like Richard Blackmore to a certain extent, and, Yngwie Malmsteen. I thought it was great, doing the classical stuff, Randy Rhoads, Michael Schenker also, for certain parts, so I guess I just picked that up and made something, from that myself. I always thought it was really interesting to mix in, classical elements in heavy metal, and that's one of the parts that I'm really happy with too. I think to intro that, I'm still proud of that. I think it sounds great still.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's important to mention too that this song is still in the King Diamond set a lot of times these days too. It still goes over great.
Yeah.
It's a tough song too because like it's not even easy to say 7th day of July of 1777, let alone have to sing that and some sort of melody over all this music that's also really interesting because it was very progressive. I felt like super progressive, and again, leading into what would eventually become prog metal and all the prog stuff. And this song had so many of those elements in it. When you were writing it, do you guys think about that stuff, or you're just writing it because this is what's coming into your brain?
I just came up with that riff in the very beginning, that was kind of turning into like a backbeat thing. And Mickey thought, hey, that was really cool, so he kind of, changed the drumming to like a backbeat thing into some parts of that, and that combination of that riff and his drumming, I guess, made that progressive feel to the song. At that time, King was just singing to anything, so he just picked that up and I got some great ideas for this, and we worked everything out in the rehearsal room back then, before we entered the studio. And we rehearsed a lot back then.
Yeah, I was curious about that too, about when you wrote the music part. Did King just come in and the music's all done pretty much, and he just put lyrics and vocals over it, or did you have to work out where like maybe change this and change that to help the vocal?
Yeah, we did that too. But I think, back in the days, for those songs I had on this album, it was pretty much everything was done. So he just did his thing over my finished music. But then, of course, with his songs, there were a few things that we worked out in the rehearsal room, like we did with everything, pretty much some details. But he was very determined with his parts, But sometimes Mickey came up with, oh, let's try this instead, something like a little bit different, or like maybe extend a little part because it was really good, or small details like that, we worked out in the rehearsal room. But mainly we had like, I would say 90% of everything was like finished, in here before we started rehearsals.
Yeah, and I also find that bands that sound really good, that have a really good sound in a rehearsal room or live, they also make better records because when you go into the studio, you don't have to sit there and tweak all the tones and everything. You pretty much have your sound together.
I know, man. I get a lot of bands, especially, back in the old days, where the bands were rehearsing really, really loud in the rehearsal room. And they just focused on their own instrument. They didn't care about the drummer or, the guitarist. They couldn't hear what they were doing. So they were coming into the studio and it's like, wow, what are you playing there? Are you playing that? I never heard that, I think we had a really good sound in the rehearsal room because everything was really balanced from the start. So we kind of knew exactly what the other guys in the band were doing, which I think is really, really important, to hear what's going on, really, instead of just focus on your own instrument, you know.
Yeah, I think you have to be aware of what everybody else is doing, and I noticed that too and stuff where I've produced things where bands will come in and everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and the other guys don't pay any attention to it. And you're right, they'll come in and oh, that's what you're playing on that song. But then you get a band like Slayer, when they're in the studio, they all know exactly what everybody's playing and how it should sound, and it's one cohesive unit, which I imagine was pretty similar to what you guys were doing.
And nowadays it's so much easier because we usually do like pre-production things, record like a simple riff and a drum machine, send it to the guys so they know exactly what to do, before we start really, working on it, or recording an album or whatever, So it's much easier now, I would say, you don't really have to rehearse that heavy, to be good. Of course, you have to practice, but rehearse as a band, you don't really have to do as much as you did back in the days, unless you're playing live in the studio. Then, then you have to do that, of course, to know what's happening, with all the other members in the band too.
So one thing I wanted to ask was, so basically the King Diamond band or solo or whatever you want to call it, at this point was 3/5 Merciful Fate. So were you guys cognizant of trying to intentionally not sound like Merciful Fate? I mean, look, you're going to bring your thing to the table, which clearly is a lot different than what Hank Sherman would bring. So naturally, that's going to affect the sound. But I just found it interesting that these records that King was making after Merciful Fate were very different than what Merciful Fate was doing in the same great way. Were you cognizant of that when you're in there, or is it just like, this is just a new band, we're just going to go with what we're doing?
No, of course I heard some of the songs with Merciful Fate before I joined King Diamond, but when I first heard the first couple of songs with King Diamond, I thought, hey, this is really cool, because it had an updated sound. It was more into the mid 80s as it was, opposed to Merciful Fate, which I always thought was like a thing from kind of a 70s kind of thing, So I thought, when I heard the first couple of songs with King Diamond, I thought it was great, because it was like a very modern songwriting, modern songs, which I thought was great. So that perfectly, fit my style of playing too. You should also know that the band, they were already in the studio when I joined the band. They'd been in the studio for about 2 weeks when I joined the band. And Mickey was calling me and said, hey, we got this guitarist, he's not working out, so you got to come down here. And they already started to record all the rhythm guitars, the drums were done, most of the bass. So when I came down, there were some rhythm guitars left to do that Michael Denner did. He did all the rhythm guitars on that first album, Fatal Portrait, we're talking about now, not the Abigail, So when I first heard that album, I just thought the songs and everything was so different from Merciful Fate, which I really liked.
Like I said, I always thought it was really interesting how that kind of changeover went, but it makes sense. It's the time was there, like you said, in the 80s, and the style of everything had changed. And I think it was very smart of everybody to kind of update the style. So was it Mickey D then that got you into the band?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. He called me on a Swedish midsummer day, hangover and everything, and said, hey, you got to come down here, it doesn't work out with this guy, So then after that, I quit my job in a music store, took my amp, my guitar, took the train down to Copenhagen, met the guys in the studio, talked with them a little bit, and then they asked me to do like a little lead on one of the songs, Dressed in White from the first album. And I ran through it a couple of times, recorded it. Then I went out, to the kitchen area, and then the guys, I guess they listened to it a few times, and they came out, and King was saying, hey, welcome to the band, welcome in the band. And I was 22 years old at the time, and I said, it's now or never,
Yeah. So I always like to ask people this, because, I've known King for forever, and, what a great guy. But I always ask people, like, so what was he like back in the day? Because he's a very unique individual when it comes to personalities and thoughts and things. And he's got a lot of stories and all these crazy stuff. What was your first opinion of him when you first met him as a young guy that he was?
Young guy, I thought it was really interesting, because I was really into kind of the horror things and the theatrical stuff. And I just thought, hey, this is great, man. So I just jumped on whatever whatever we talked about. I thought it was great, because as I said, I've always been into that horror thing, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath kind of thing. And if you can mix that with whatever good music and theatrical stuff, that was great. So I thought his ideas were great. Sometimes a little extreme, but I mean, back in the days, that was cool, man.
King was you guys as a band were really one of the early bands that really kind of adopted to have a big stage show. Because you had Kiss, like you said, Kiss and Alice Cooper in the 70s. But really by the time the 80s came around there, I can't remember really any metal bands really having a big show at that point. And you guys came out and started having, all these characters and props and all this stuff that I remember first time I saw the band. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I love this stuff.
And when I first saw photos of Ozzy Osbourne, the kind of construction they had on stage, I just love that. So my dream was always to have something in that kind of style. And that's what actually we had, on the first couple of tours too. Even though it was a smaller scale of everything, of course, but I always like to have a lot of cool elements, of horror on stage. I thought it was great.
Well, and you guys also changed the game when it came to production and shows. When King first came back from after the heart attack, I'll never forget you guys played Sweden Rock, and whatever money you were being paid for that, you put all into the production. I had this like completely over the top production. And at that point in time, no bands were just going out and just, going up on stage and playing. And that was it. No production, no nothing. And when you guys did that, and YouTube being a big thing back then, people could actually see, even if you weren't at the show, you could see the show on YouTube, and people started watching this. And I remember specifically a bunch of our bands who were like, "Whoa, look at this show they're doing! Like, we need to start upping our game for our live shows." And it became a thing where after that show and subsequent shows that you guys did, that really changed the game. Where all of a sudden bands had to have a big show, and then you lead into Ghost and Amon Amarth, and I mean everybody started having fire or stuff going on stage. Where before that, for like early 2000 stuff is very kind of just hardcore, just let's go up on stage and play. So that was extremely important for the way metal became after that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I always thought it was really interesting to see bands with a cool stage set. I think it makes a big difference. Of course, the music is the main thing, but if you can combine that with a cool stage set, it's awesome.
Yeah, it was another game changer and another reason why King Diamond and the band have been so influential in so many different ways. And specifically to this record, because this was really the first, huge King Diamond album, and you're a pretty nice, down to earth, humble guy. How does it make you feel when, I mean, everybody I know in a band or fans look back at this album specifically as one of the greatest heavy metal albums ever?
Wow. Yeah, that's what people say, It's one of our best albums too, because we kind of captured that cool feel. And I still can't, really explain what it was. It was just the chemistry of the whole band on that album was like mixed down on the album, actually. We just had a great time and great songs, great melodies, great production. Everything was just wow. I had a great feel about everything. The whole recording was really, really cool.
Yeah, you find that a lot when there's a really special album and you talk to the guys who make it. Usually they're aware that something is happening there. I mean, I don't think you ever would have thought it would be as big as it was, maybe, but certainly you knew that something was happening.
No, I mean, you could never, imagine that we were going to play that album like 20 years later, like the full album, 20 years later and stuff like that. We never thought that, but we did that back in 2015 and 16, and that was great because, people really appreciated that,
Yeah, like I said, legendary album, and it just influenced so many bands, especially like I mentioned earlier, the musical quality of it. And I've always been a big fan of metal and the influence of classical music, like we discussed earlier about it. And I think that's very important because so many bands, you mentioned Blackmore and Rainbow, those early Rainbow records with Dio were, and Richie's talked about it, where he basically, most of those songs were could have been classical pieces that he just converted into a rock metal thing.
Some great stuff, and that was one of my first guitarists I actually listened to. But I guess I didn't really listen to him as a guitarist only back then when I was like 10, 11 years old. I listened to the whole band, the whole feel. And one of my first albums was Made in Japan, which I still think is a great album.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know it's late on your end and early on mine, but it was really great to do this. And again, legendary album, song. You're a legend as well. So thanks again for doing this.
Hey, thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks to everybody on the show this episode. Andy La Rocque, Marc Lewis, and of course, Martin Popoff. As always, thanks to Lizzie Borden for our theme song and producer Christian Blatt for putting it all together. We'll see you guys next episode.